You were never enough for me. Sign the papers." He said it the same way he'd say pass the salt. Calm, rehearsed. And she, Emma, was still in our bed, pulling the sheet up, not even looking at me. I was holding yellow tulips, his favorites. I'd left work early to surprise him. My hands wouldn't let go of those flowers, even when the papers hit my chest, even when he turned away like I was already gone. 11 years. 11 years of showing up, and he looked at me like I was standing in the wrong house. That was the last Tuesday I cried for Benjamin Cole. If this story reaches something deep inside you, subscribe right now, drop your city in the comments, and stay with me until the very last word. I need to tell you something about the woman I was before that afternoon, because you can't understand what was taken from me unless you understand what I believed I had. I believed in us, completely, embarrassingly. The kind of belief that makes you ignore small things. The way he stopped asking how your day went. The way he started working late on Fridays. The way he flinched slightly when you touched his shoulder from behind. I told myself those were normal things. I told myself that marriages go through phases, that love deepens and quiets down over time, that what we had was real and solid and worth fighting for. I had been fighting for it for 11 years. 11 years of building a home together, of compromise and patience and showing up even when I didn't want to. I cooked his favorite meal, lemon herb chicken with roasted potatoes, every Sunday without fail, even on the Sundays when I was exhausted down to my bones. I planned our vacations. I remembered his mother's birthday when he forgot. I stayed up late editing his presentations when he had early morning board meetings. I showed up. Every single time, I showed up. And I thought that mattered. That Tuesday, I had gotten off work 3 hours early because my supervisor had sent us home. There was a water leak in the office building, and they told us all to go home and rest. I remember thinking, as I drove to the flower shop, that it was actually perfect timing. Ben and I hadn't had a real afternoon together in months. Maybe we could watch a movie. Maybe we could just sit together and talk the way we used to, back when talking to him felt like breathing, natural, effortless, necessary. I bought him tulips, yellow ones, his favorites. I was humming when I put my key in the lock. I was still humming when I pushed open the front door. And then I heard it, her laugh. It wasn't loud. It wasn't wild. It was soft, intimate, the kind of laugh you share with someone in the dark when the world has shrunk down to just the two of you. I knew that laugh didn't belong in my house. I knew it the way you know when something is wrong before your mind has fully caught up to the feeling. My body knew first. My stomach dropped. My fingers went cold around the stems of those yellow tulips. My feet kept moving forward, even though some part of me was screaming to stop, to turn around, to walk back out the door and pretend I had never come home early. But I didn't stop. I walked to our bedroom. The door was half open. I pushed it the rest of the way. And there they were, Ben and Emma, his assistant. The woman I had invited to our Christmas dinner last year because I felt sorry that she had nowhere to go. The woman I had helped pick out a dress for the company holiday party. The woman I had smiled at across conference tables and called by her first name with genuine warmth because I had no reason in the world to think of her as anything other than a colleague of my husband's. She scrambled to cover herself. Her face went red. She couldn't look at me. But Ben looked at me like I was an inconvenience, not a wife, not a person he had loved for 11 years, an inconvenience. Lily, he said, just my name, flat, steady, like he was reading it off a list. I couldn't speak. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. I was still holding the flowers. I remember noticing that detail because it felt absurd. I was standing there holding yellow tulips for a man who was in our bed with someone else, and my hands wouldn't let go of them. I've been meaning to talk to you, Ben said, and he sat up, casual, unhurried, like this was a conversation we were having over breakfast. Actually, this saves me having to set up a time. I found my voice somewhere beneath all that shock and disbelief. What are you doing? My voice came out strange, thin, and far away. "Lily, what are you doing, Ben?" He got up. He put on his shirt. He walked to the dresser, opened the second drawer, the one I always kept clean and organized for him, and he pulled out an envelope, a thick, cream-colored envelope. He held it out to me. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," he said. "Everything's been taken care of. I'm asking you to sign the divorce papers." The flowers hit the floor. I don't remember dropping them. They were just suddenly at my feet, petals already bending against the hardwood. "You... what?" I whispered. "It's not working, Lily. It hasn't been working for a long time. I think somewhere in your heart you know that." "I don't," I shook my head. My vision was blurring. "I don't know that. I have no idea what you're talking about. I thought we were—" "You thought," he said, and there was something in his tone that twisted like a blade, patronizing, tired, like he had been waiting for this conversation for years and was already bored by it. "That's the problem. You've always just assumed things were fine because you wanted them to be fine." "Because I trusted you," I said, and my voice broke on that last word. "Because I loved you." Emma had gone very still in the corner of the room. I looked at her for one brief, terrible moment, and I saw something on her face that was almost worse than the guilt. It was pity. She pitied me. I turned back to Ben. "How long?" He paused just a fraction of a second too long. "That doesn't matter now." "It matters to me. How long, Ben?" He straightened his collar. "About 2 years." 2 years. 2 years of Sunday lemon herb chicken. 2 years of remembering his mother's birthday. 2 years of staying up late editing his presentations, planning his vacations, folding his laundry, carrying his weight alongside mine without ever once complaining, because I thought that was what love looked like. 2 years of being a fool. "Get out," I said. My voice was surprisingly steady. "Both of you. Get out of my house right now." "Lily, this is my house, Ben. I signed on the mortgage the same day you did, so get out." He looked at me for a long moment, and then, and this is the part I will never, as long as I live, forget, he almost smiled. Not a mean smile, almost like he was impressed, like he was seeing some version of me he hadn't expected to exist. "Keep the papers," he said quietly. "Read them over. My lawyer says they're fair." He walked out. Emma followed him, not meeting my eyes, and I stood alone in my bedroom in the middle of the afternoon, surrounded by yellow tulips scattered across the floor, holding an envelope with my entire marriage reduced to documents inside. I sank down to the ground right there. I didn't make it to the bed or the chair or anywhere dignified. I just went down slowly, and I sat on the floor among those crushed flowers, and I pressed the envelope against my chest, and I cried until I couldn't breathe. That was the last time I cried for Ben. I didn't know that yet, but it was. The next few days were a fog so thick I could barely see through it. I moved through the house like a ghost, touching walls, opening cabinets, sitting at the kitchen table staring at nothing. My phone buzzed constantly. Ben's name appeared over and over, not with regret, not with apologies, but with questions about logistics. Who gets the car? Who keeps the furniture? Had I read through the papers yet? I couldn't answer any of it. I couldn't find language for what I was feeling. It was bigger than sadness. It was something closer to erasure. The sensation that the person I had been for 11 years had been a character in someone else's story, and now the story was over, and I didn't know who I was outside of it. On the third day, I called Sarah. Sarah had been my best friend since college, 14 years of friendship. She had been the maid of honor at my wedding. She had held my hand through every hard thing I had ever faced, and I had held hers right back. I needed her more in that moment than I had ever needed anyone. She answered on the second ring. "Lily?" Her voice was careful, too careful. "Sarah, I need to see you," I said. "Something happened, something really—" "I know," she said. "Ben called me." I went quiet. "He called you?" He explained everything. He said you'd been unhappy for years, that you'd been pulling away, that you'd been cold and distant, that the marriage had broken down long before." She stopped herself. "I'm not trying to take sides, Lily. I think both of you have some things to work through." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Sarah, he cheated on me. He had been sleeping with his assistant for 2 years. He handed me divorce papers the same afternoon I found them together." Silence. "I know this is hard to hear," she said finally. "He called you first," I said slowly. "He called you before I even... He was preparing for this. He's been preparing for this." "Lily, I don't think it helps to look at it that way. I need you right now." My voice cracked. "I need my best friend. Please." Another silence. Longer this time. "I think you need some space to process this on your own," Sarah said gently. "I think reaching out and leaning on people isn't going to help you heal. I hung up. I stared at my phone for a very long time. And then I understood something that settled into my chest like cold water. Ben hadn't just been planning to leave me. He had been planning to isolate me first. He had gotten to Sarah before I could. He had painted his version of events before I had a chance to tell mine. He had been strategic about this in a way I had never imagined him capable of, because I had spent 11 years believing I knew who he was. I hadn't known him at all. I signed the divorce papers on a Wednesday. I signed them at the kitchen table, alone, with a cup of coffee that had gone cold beside me, and I signed every page without letting myself stop and think too long about what each signature meant. The lawyer Ben had hired was efficient and polished and completely indifferent to anything I had to say. The settlement was what they called fair. I got half of the savings account, which turned out to be less than I had thought, because Ben had apparently been moving money around for longer than I had realized. I got the right to keep my car. I got 30 days to vacate the house. 30 days to pack 11 years. I called my mother the night after I signed. She was 3 states away, and her health had been declining for the past 2 years, and I had not wanted to put this on her, but I needed to hear her voice. "Oh, sweetheart," she said when I told her. Just those 2 words, soft as a hand pressed to a cheek, and I fell apart all over again, quietly, so she wouldn't hear how bad it was. "You come home," she said. "You come home and we'll figure it out together." "I can't, Mom. I can't move back home. I'm 42 years old." "Age doesn't matter when your heart is broken," she said. "I know, but I need to do this on my own. I need to figure out who I am without all of this." She was quiet for a moment, and then, "Your father and I used to say that the hardest thing about loving someone is that when it ends, you have to learn how to be a whole person again, not half a person looking for the other half, a whole person." I wrote that down on a napkin after I hung up. I taped it to the bathroom mirror. I read it every morning for months. I found the apartment on a Thursday during a lunch break from the temp job I had taken to start generating income immediately. It was on the 4th floor of a building that smelled faintly of old wood and someone else's cooking. The apartment was small, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people to stand in at the same time, a living area with a window that looked out onto the street below. The landlord, a heavy-set man named Harold, who wore the same gray cardigan every time I saw him, showed me around with the business-like efficiency of someone who had done this too many times to pretend it was exciting. "Heat's included," he said. "Laundry is in the basement, coin-operated. No pets over 20 pounds. Quiet hours start at 10. I stood in the middle of that tiny living room and I looked at the walls, which were painted a yellow that had faded to the color of old paper, and I thought, this is where I start over. "I'll take it," I said. Harold looked at me with the kind of neutral expression that comes from years of watching strangers make decisions that will reshape their lives in rooms he has long since stopped being moved by. "First and last month up front," he said. I know. I had the check already written in my purse. Moving in took one afternoon. I didn't have much. I had been careful to take only what was mine, truly mine, not ours. and what was left fit in the back of my car and a small rented moving van I drove myself. I made 3 trips up 4 flights of stairs, and by the end of it, my arms were aching and my knees were complaining, and I was sweating in a way that felt strangely good, like my body was reminding me it was still working, still capable, still here. I put my mother's napkin on the bathroom mirror the first night. I ate cereal standing at the kitchen counter because I hadn't bought a table yet. I fell asleep on a second-hand mattress that was softer on one side than the other, in a room where the streetlight came through the curtains in a thin orange stripe across the ceiling. And I did not cry. The bookstore job came 3 weeks later. It was not glamorous. It paid barely above minimum wage. The commute was 40 minutes each way on public transit. My manager was a 26-year-old named Derek, who used the phrase circle back in every third sentence, and who had strong opinions about the placement of the staff picks display. But the books were mine. I had always loved reading. It was one of those things about myself that had quietly gotten buried under the weight of being Ben's wife. His schedule, his needs, his preferences, always somehow finding their way to the front of the line. In the bookstore, surrounded by shelves I was responsible for, recommending titles to customers who trusted my taste, I started remembering myself. I started remembering that I had opinions, strong ones, that I could speak about things I loved with genuine enthusiasm, and people would lean in, interested, wanting to know more. That I was not a background character in someone else's story. I was a whole person. I was starting to believe it. It was on an ordinary Tuesday, 3 months after I moved into my apartment, 2 months after I started at the bookstore, that the door opened and a man walked in wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He was looking at his phone. He wasn't watching where he was going. I was coming around the corner of the center display table with a fresh cup of coffee from the back room, and we collided so completely and suddenly that the coffee went in one direction and my dignity went in another. The cup hit his chest. The lid popped off. Hot coffee spread across the front of his jacket in a dark, spreading stain. And I stood there with an empty cup in my hand and my heart in my throat. "Oh my God," I said. "Oh my God, I am so sorry. I didn't see you. I am so sorry." The man looked down at his jacket. Then he looked up at me, and he smiled. Not a polite, strained, I'm choosing not to be angry smile. A real one, quiet and warm and genuinely amused, like this was the most interesting thing that had happened to him all week. "Are you hurt?" he asked. I blinked. Are you hurt? I just poured coffee all over you." "Hot coffee," he clarified. "Are you burned?" No, it went mostly on you. I'm so sorry. Please I can call the cleaners. I can pay for..." "It's fine," he said, still smiling. "It's just a jacket." "It's a very expensive jacket." "Things are just things," he said. And something about the way he said it, not dismissive, not practiced, but genuinely calm and settled, made me go quiet for a second. He stuck out his hand. "I'm Alex." I shook it. "Lily, and I'm really, truly sorry." "Lily," he repeated, like he was filing it somewhere useful. "Do you work here?" "I do." "Good." He put his phone in his pocket. "Then maybe you can help me. I'm looking for a gift for my father. He's turning 75 this month, and I have absolutely no idea what to get him. And I was told that a good bookstore is the only place where that problem gets solved." And just like that, covered in the evidence of my clumsiness, standing in a bookstore that paid me barely enough to cover groceries, 3 months out from the worst day of my life, I laughed. A real laugh. The first one in a very long time. "That depends," I said. "What does your father like?" "History," Alex said. "Military history mostly. He spent 30 years in the Navy. He has opinions about every major naval battle since the Spanish Armada." "Oh, I know exactly where to take you," I said. And I led him to the back of the store, between the tall shelves where the afternoon light came through the high windows and made everything glow a little. And I started talking about books I loved. And he started listening the way people rarely do, completely, unhurriedly, like he had all the time in the world, and this was exactly where he wanted to spend it. I didn't know who he was yet, but I remember thinking, as I pulled a worn hardcover from the shelf and pressed it into his hands, that there was something different about this man, something that made you feel like you were the most important person in the room. I remember thinking, he sees me. I didn't know yet how much that would matter. I didn't know yet how much everything was about to change. He came back the next day. I didn't expect that. When Alex walked out of the bookstore that Tuesday afternoon with a bag of 3 books under his arm and a thank you that felt genuinely warm rather than politely automatic, I assumed it was the last I would see of him. People like him, people in suits like that, people who carried themselves with that particular brand of quiet confidence, they didn't linger in small bookstores run by women who spilled coffee on them. They moved on. They always moved on. But Wednesday morning, 20 minutes before my shift ended, the door opened and he walked back in. No suit this time, just dark slacks and a simple gray shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, looking somehow more at ease than he had the day before. He spotted me immediately and raised a hand in a small wave, like we were old friends, and this was already a habit. "You're back," I said, surprised enough that I forgot to pretend I wasn't. "My father called me last night," he said, walking toward the register where I was standing. He'd already started the first book. He was furious I'd only bought 3. I laughed. "Which one did he start?" "The one about the Battle of Midway." Alex leaned against the counter. "He called me at 9:30, which means he stayed up reading instead of watching his news programs. You've already disrupted his entire routine, and you haven't even met him." "I'll take that as a compliment." "It is one." He looked at me steadily. "I was thinking, do you have time to help me find a few more? And maybe," he paused just briefly, something careful and considerate in his expression, "if you haven't had lunch yet, I could buy you something, as a proper apology for being distracted on my phone yesterday." I almost said no. The word was right there, already forming. I was still raw in ways I didn't always recognize until something pressed against the tender spots. And the idea of sitting across from a stranger and making conversation felt exhausting in a way I couldn't fully explain. I was still learning how to be present in my own life. The idea of performing normalcy for someone new felt like work I wasn't ready for. But then I thought of my apartment, the table I'd finally bought, small and secondhand, pushed against the wall because there was no room for it anywhere else. The quiet that had started feeling less like peace and more like absence. The way I ate most of my meals standing at the counter because sitting down alone made the silence louder. "Okay," I said, "let me grab my jacket." The look on his face when I said yes, not triumphant, not relieved, just genuinely pleased, like I'd given him something small and real, stayed with me all through the rest of that morning. We went to a diner 2 blocks from the bookstore, the kind of place with laminated menus and coffee that refills itself every time you look away from your cup. He ordered eggs. I ordered a club sandwich, and we talked. Not about big things, not about life and pain and the wreckage of the past year. We talked about books, about his father, who had apparently read every significant account of every Pacific naval battle and still found things to argue with, about my mother, who preferred mystery novels and had very strong opinions about which fictional detectives were actually believable, about the customer who had come into the bookstore the week before, asking for something that would change her life, and being genuinely offended when I asked her to narrow it down. Alex laughed at that, a real laugh, unguarded and full. And I noticed, the way you notice things you're not trying to notice, that he had the kind of face that was more interesting than conventionally handsome. A face that did something when he listened. Some quality of attention that made you feel like what you were saying genuinely mattered to him. I had forgotten what that felt like. By the time I realized we had been sitting there for 2 hours, the lunch crowd had thinned, and the afternoon light had shifted, and the coffee in my cup had gone cold again. I should get back, I said, suddenly embarrassed by how easily the time had gone. Of course. He didn't try to extend it. He didn't push. He just picked up the check, quickly, without making a thing of it, and left a tip that was more generous than I expected, without being ostentatious, and walked me back to the bookstore door. Thank you, I said, for lunch. Thank you for the company, he said. And then, same time next week? I looked at him for a moment, trying to read something that wasn't quite readable. Not suspicion, exactly, just a kind of careful self-protection that had become second nature over the past few months. Why? I asked, directly, because I was done with assuming things. He didn't look thrown by the question. Because I enjoyed talking to you, he said simply, and I think you probably don't get to talk about books enough with someone who actually wants to listen. That answer was so exactly right that it almost made me uncomfortable, like he had understood something true about me without me having to explain it. Same time next week, I said, and I went back inside before I could change my mind. That was how it started, not with fireworks, not with a grand gesture or a dramatic declaration. Just a diner, a club sandwich, and a man who listened like it meant something. Over the weeks that followed, our Tuesday lunches became the steadiest thing in my life. He was always on time. He always let me choose the restaurant, which rotated between the diner, a Thai place I'd discovered 2 streets over, and occasionally the little Italian spot that was too expensive for my budget, but that he insisted on whenever I looked tired, as though pasta was his prescription for long weeks. He never checked his phone at the table. He remembered details, things I had mentioned offhandedly weeks before, small observations about my mother, or a difficult customer, or a book I was in the middle of, and he brought them back into conversation naturally, like they had stayed with him. Nobody had paid that kind of attention to me in years, maybe ever. But I kept my guard up. I was honest with myself about that. I liked Alex. I liked his company and his steadiness and the way he made me feel like myself rather than like someone's discarded wife. But I had spent 11 years trusting someone completely and had walked into my own bedroom to find out that trust had been a fiction. I was not going to rush anything. I was not going to let warmth become recklessness. And so I kept things light, friendly. I did not ask him too many personal questions, and he did not push when I deflected the ones he asked me. We existed in a comfortable middle ground, close enough to feel real, careful enough to feel safe. Until the day he pushed just slightly past the boundary. Not intentionally, but some truths have a way of surfacing whether you intend them to or not. It was our 6th Tuesday lunch, the Italian place. He had noticed, correctly, that I looked exhausted. I'd been picking up extra evening shifts at the bookstore because the rent had gone up by $60 a month, and my temp work had dried up, and I was doing the math in my head constantly, calculating and recalculating whether everything was going to hold together. I hadn't told him any of that, because it wasn't his problem, and because I had learned, in the past year, to be careful about the difference between being vulnerable and being a burden. But that day he looked at me across the table and he said, quietly, "You don't have to tell me anything, but I want you to know that I can see when you're carrying something heavy, and you've been carrying something heavy for a while." I looked down at my pasta. "I'm fine." "Lily, I'm fine, Alex. You say that the same way my grandmother used to say it," he said, which means the exact opposite. I exhaled. The candor of it caught me off guard, the way real things sometimes do. And I found myself talking, not planning to, not choosing to, just opening like something that had been closed too long. I told him about the divorce. Not all of it, not the worst of it, but enough. The 11 years, the afternoon with the flowers, the papers on the dresser. The way Ben had gotten to Sarah before I did. Alex listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to fill the silences, didn't offer the reflexive reassurances that most people reach for when they're uncomfortable with someone else's pain. He just sat with it, with me. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then, "And Sarah, have you heard from her since?" She texted once, 3 weeks after, said she hoped I was doing well and that she was thinking of me. I shook my head. I didn't answer. That was the right call. Was it? Some days I think I should have. No, he said, and there was something direct and certain in his voice. Someone who abandons you when you need them most and then reaches out once the immediate drama has passed isn't apologizing. They're managing their own guilt. You didn't owe her a response. He paused. You don't owe anyone your forgiveness before you're ready. I stared at him. That's a very specific thing to say. He looked at his glass for a moment. I've had my own version of betrayal, he said quietly. Different circumstances, but I know what it costs when people you trusted rewrite the story in their own favor. It was the first genuinely personal thing he had ever shared with me, and the way he said it, not as a trauma dump, not as a bid for sympathy, but simply as an acknowledgement that he understood from the inside, cracked something open between us that hadn't been open before. What happened? I asked. He smiled, but it was a different kind of smile than his usual one, something more careful around the edges. That's a longer lunch, he said. I have time. He looked at me, really looked at me, the way he sometimes did when he was deciding something. Next week, he said. I said, okay. But I drove home that evening thinking about the way he'd said, I know what it costs. The weight of those words, the lived-in quality of them, the sense that whatever his version of betrayal was, it had left a mark that hadn't fully healed either. I thought, we are both people who have been broken open by someone we trusted. I thought, that means something. And I didn't sleep well that night, and in the morning I told myself it was just because of the long shift, and I almost believed it. The following Tuesday, he told me. We were back at the diner because the Italian place felt too intimate for what he was about to say, though I didn't know that until afterward. He had been engaged 5 years ago to a woman named Claire who had worked in his industry, whom he had loved in the uncomplicated, full-speed way you love someone when you believe the future is clearly laid out before you. They had built a life together, made plans together, spoken about children and a house and growing old in the specific, detailed language of people who are certain. And then she had left. Abruptly, without the slow erosion he might have seen coming, without warning signs he could point to and say, there, that was when it started. She had sat down across from him at their kitchen table and told him she had been unhappy for 2 years and that she had tried to tell him and he hadn't heard her and she was done waiting. The worst part, he said, turning his coffee cup in his hands, was that she was right. I hadn't heard her. I was consumed by work, by building something. I thought she understood what that required, and she did understand for a while. And then she stopped being able to, and I didn't notice until it was too late. He paused. I'm not blaming her. I'm saying I failed her in ways that I had to sit with, and sitting with that was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I was quiet for a moment. Most people in that situation would just blame the other person, I said. It's easier, he said, but it's not honest. And you're always honest? He looked at me steadily. I try to be, even when it costs me something. There was a beat of silence between us, the kind that isn't empty, but full, dense with things that haven't quite been said yet. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because you told me something true last week, he said, and I don't believe in uneven exchanges. That was the moment. I felt it as clearly as a key turning in a lock. Something shifted between us. Not dramatically, not explosively, but unmistakably. The careful, friendly distance we had been maintaining began to feel less like wisdom and more like habit, like a door we were both standing on the same side of, waiting for one of us to reach for the handle. I was not ready to reach for it yet, but I knew it was there. I drove home that afternoon thinking about honesty, about what it actually meant, not just telling the truth in moments of confrontation, but volunteering the truth when it was easier to stay quiet, about how rare it was, about how long it had been since someone had offered me that, clean and unpretentious, and asking nothing in return. And I thought, carefully, deliberately, with all my self-protective instincts fully engaged. Be careful, Lily. This could be something. That means you can get hurt again. But I also thought, or it could be real. And I didn't push that thought away. 3 weeks later, I ran into Ben. I had not seen him since the day I signed the papers. I had not spoken to him, had not answered the texts about logistics after his lawyer handled the final details, had not let myself drive past our old neighborhood, even when the longer route would have been easier. I had been deliberate about putting distance between my old life and the one I was slowly, painstakingly building. But you can be as deliberate as you like, and the city still does what it wants. He was outside a coffee shop, 2 blocks from my apartment. He was with Emma. She was laughing, that same soft, intimate laugh, and her hand was in the crook of his arm, and they looked, from a distance, like any ordinary couple having an ordinary afternoon. I stopped walking. My heart did something strange and complicated in my chest. Not the searing pain I had braced for in those imagined encounters I'd rehearsed in the middle of sleepless nights. Something different, quieter, something closer to recognition. Ah, there it is. There's the life I thought I had, with someone else in it now. Ben looked up and saw me. For one long, suspended second, we just looked at each other. Emma's smile faded. She glanced between us, uncertain, her hand tightening slightly on his arm. Ben straightened. "Lily," he said. "Ben," I said. "You look," he started. "Don't," I said. Not sharply, just clearly, just firmly. The way you speak when you know exactly where you stand. "You don't need to say anything. I'm just walking home." He nodded. Emma looked at the ground. I kept walking. I didn't run. I didn't cry. I didn't go over the conversation 17 times in my head the way I would have months earlier. I walked the 2 blocks to my building, went up the 4 flights of stairs, let myself into my apartment, set my keys on the counter, and stood in the middle of my small kitchen and took one long, slow breath and realized I was okay. Not performing okay. Not telling myself I was okay in that desperate, papering over way I had in the early weeks when the hurt was so fresh and enormous that the only choice was to move through it by telling myself lies until they became almost true. Actually, genuinely, in my bones, okay. The encounter with Ben had not destroyed me. It had not unraveled the months of quiet rebuilding. It had not sent me back to the floor of my bedroom with crushed flowers around me. I was still standing, still whole, still mine. I texted Alex that evening, just 3 words. "Good day today." Because I wanted to tell someone, because telling it made it more real. He texted back within a minute. "Tell me tomorrow?" I smiled at my phone like a teenager and immediately felt embarrassed by it and smiled again anyway. "Yes," I typed back. "Same time." What I did not know, what I had no possible way of knowing, was that the following Tuesday was the day everything I thought I understood about Alex was going to change. Not in a bad way, not in the way I had learned to brace for when things shifted, but in a way so large and unexpected that it would force me to look at the past 2 months through an entirely different lens and ask myself a question I had not yet been ready to ask. He had been patient. He had been honest. He had been careful with me in all the ways that mattered. And he had been keeping something from me, not out of deception, but because he had been waiting. The way you wait when you genuinely care about someone's reaction, for exactly the right moment to tell me who he really was. That Tuesday, he was already at the diner when I arrived. That was unusual. I was almost always early, old habit from years of making sure everything was ready before Ben needed it. And Alex was almost always exactly on time, not early, not late, with the precise reliability of someone who respected other people's schedules as much as his own. But that morning he was already in the booth, both hands wrapped around a coffee cup, and something about the set of his shoulders told me before I even sat down that this was not going to be a regular Tuesday. "You're early," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. I wanted to be here first. He looked up at me, and his expression was different. Still warm, still him, but underneath it something careful and deliberate that I hadn't seen before. Like a man who had rehearsed something and was now deciding whether to use the rehearsed version or throw it out and just speak. "That sounds ominous," I said, keeping my voice light. "It's not ominous," he said. "It's just, I need to tell you something. And I've been trying to figure out the right way to say it for about 3 weeks now, and I've concluded there is no right way, so I'm just going to say it." My stomach tightened. I had learned, the hard way, that sentences beginning with, "I need to tell you something," rarely led anywhere comfortable. I kept my face neutral, but my hands found each other under the table. "Okay," I said. He took a breath. "I'm the CEO of Hartwell Technologies." I waited for the rest of the sentence. There was no rest of the sentence. "I'm sorry," I said. "Hartwell Technologies." "Yes." I knew that name. Everyone knew that name. Hartwell Technologies was one of the largest tech companies in the country. It had been on the cover of 3 national business magazines in the last year alone. Its CEO, I was searching my memory now, pulling at fragments of headlines I had skimmed in waiting rooms and on my phone. Its CEO was someone whose name appeared in the same sentences as words like visionary and industry-defining and net worth estimated at. "You're Alexander Hartwell," I said. "Alex," he said. The same quiet correction he always made when anyone called him by his full name. As though I should have connected that sooner and somehow hadn't, or had been so thoroughly not looking for it that the obvious had slid right past me. I sat back in my seat. He watched me, not defensively, not with the braced, prepared look of someone expecting anger, with the particular stillness of a person who has said the true thing and is now simply waiting to see what it costs them. "You have been coming to my bookstore," I said slowly, "every Tuesday for 2 months. You have been eating at this diner, ordering eggs." I looked at him. "You are a billionaire." "The eggs are genuinely good here," he said. "Alex, I know." He set down his coffee cup. "I know how it looks. And I want to explain, if you'll let me, not because I think an explanation excuses anything, but because I want you to understand where it came from." I was quiet. Not cold, just processing. The way you process something that reorders the recent past into a shape you didn't expect. All those Tuesdays, the diner, the Italian place, his rolled-up sleeves and his simple gray shirts, and the way he'd insisted on paying without making it feel like a statement about money. Because, I now understood, money was simply not something he had to think about. "Explain," I said. He leaned forward. "About a year before I met you, I went through something that I told you a version of, Claire leaving. But there was more to it than what I said. When she left, she told me that she had never felt like she knew me, the real me. She said that every person in my life related to me through the lens of what I represented, the company, the success, the name. She said she had spent 3 years trying to find the person underneath all of that and had run out of patience." He paused. And when I was honest with myself, I understood what she meant, because I had spent so long being Alexander Hartwell that I had almost forgotten how to just be Alex. I listened. The careful, full kind of listening he had modeled for me all those months. "So when I walked into your bookstore," he continued, "and you spilled coffee on me and had absolutely no idea who I was and looked at me like I was just a man who needed a book recommendation, that was the first genuinely uncomplicated interaction I'd had with a stranger in longer than I could remember, and I didn't want to ruin it. By telling me you were worth more than my entire apartment building," I said flatly. "By changing what we were," he said. "The moment I told you everything would shift, you would have looked at me differently, not because of who you are, but because that's what happens. It always happens. People stop seeing you and start seeing the thing you represent." He looked at me steadily. "I didn't want you to stop seeing me, and the terrible, inconvenient thing was, I understood. I understood completely. Not because it was right, but because I had spent 11 years with a man who had never truly seen me, and I knew what it meant to be hungry for that, to protect it when you found it, to be afraid of the things that could take it away. That didn't mean I wasn't angry. I had a right to know, I said quietly, not because it would have changed anything, but because you were making a decision for me, about what I could handle, about what I would do with the information. That's not, I stopped. That's not treating me like an equal. He didn't look away. You're right, he said. I know you're right. I'm not arguing that it was the correct choice. I'm telling you why I made it. And I'm telling you now because the longer I didn't tell you, the more it started feeling like something I was hiding. And hiding things from you felt wrong in a way that hiding things from most people doesn't. I looked at him for a long moment. There are decisions you make with your head, carefully, systematically, weighing evidence and probability and past patterns. And then there are decisions you make with something deeper, something that's been refined by enough experience that it's learned to read things your brain hasn't caught up to yet. Every Tuesday for 2 months, I had sat across from this man and he had been steady. Honest about his feelings, honest about his failures, honest about the things that had cost him. He had not tried to impress me. He had not pushed. He had not made me feel small or broken or like a project to be fixed. He had seen me. And now he was sitting here telling me a hard truth in the most direct way he knew how, watching my face with the quiet attention of a man who was genuinely prepared to accept whatever I decided. I need to think, I said finally. Okay. I'm not ending this. I just need to think. Something in his face released almost imperceptibly. Take whatever time you need. I'll be here. I believed him. That was the thing. I believed him, and after the past year, belief didn't come cheap. I walked home instead of taking the bus because I needed the movement. I needed my feet on the ground and the city around me and the physical reality of myself moving through space while I sorted through what I was feeling. The anger was real, clean and valid and worth honoring. But underneath it, and growing faster, was something else. Something that kept returning to his face when he said, I didn't want you to stop seeing me. The unguarded quality of it, the willingness to say exactly the thing that made him most vulnerable. Ben had never, in 11 years, said the thing that made him most vulnerable. I understood now that it was because he had never truly been vulnerable with me. I had loved someone who had always held the most important part of himself behind a wall, and I had mistaken the wall for depth. Alex had no wall, or if he did, he had made a deliberate decision to put it down with me. I called my mother that evening. Tell me the complicated thing, she said, because she always knew when there was one. I told her everything, all of it. The bookstore, the Tuesdays, the coffee on the expensive jacket, the diner and the Italian place, and the conversation about Claire, and the way he listened. And then the thing he told me this morning. When I finished, there was a long pause. Do you trust him? She asked. I don't know yet. Yes, you do, she said. You just don't want to get it wrong again. I was quiet. Lily, there's a difference between the wisdom that comes from being hurt and the fear that comes from being hurt. One protects you. One just stops you. She let that sit for a moment. Which one are you listening to right now? I didn't have an answer, but I thought about it all night, and by morning, I knew. I texted him before my shift started. I want to talk. Tonight? His response came immediately. Name the place. We met at the Italian restaurant because I had decided something, that I was not going to let fear make my choices anymore, that I was going to walk toward things that were real even when they scared me, especially when they scared me, because the alternative was the small and careful life of someone who had decided that not being hurt was worth more than being alive. I sat down across from him and I said, I'm not going to pretend that I'm not unsettled, because I am. It's a significant thing to find out about someone. I know, he said, and I need you to understand that if we move forward, if this becomes something, I am not going to be managed. I'm not going to be handled or protected from information you think I can't deal with. I have spent the last year learning what my own spine feels like, and I am not going to give that up for anyone. I wouldn't ask you to, he said. I need more than that. I need you to actually mean it. He held my gaze. Ask me anything, he said, right now. Anything you want to know, I will answer it. So I did. I asked him about the company, what it actually did, how large it was, what his day-to-day life looked like. I asked him about the people in his world, the ones who wanted things from him, the ones who were genuinely in his corner. I asked him about his family, his father, the retired Navy man who was apparently now 3 books into a collection and furious there weren't more. I asked him about his apartment, his routine, the last time he had done something completely ordinary just for the pleasure of it. He answered everything, without deflection, without spin, without the practiced smoothness of someone who had a public-facing version ready for deployment. He answered like a person. By the end of the evening, I felt like I actually knew him, not the outline of him, not the performance of him, him. And that was the moment I stopped holding back. Not all at once. I wasn't going to be reckless, but I let myself feel what I had been carefully not feeling for 2 months. And what I felt was enough to make me catch my breath. Over the weeks that followed, things changed. Not dramatically, no dramatic declarations, no sweeping gestures. He was not the kind of man who expressed love by filling rooms with flowers or showing up in limousines. He expressed it by being present, by calling when he said he would, by showing up at the bookstore on a Thursday evening when I'd mentioned in passing that we were doing inventory and offering to help, then spending 3 hours on the floor with me, sorting through stacks of returns without a word of complaint, occasionally reading the back covers of books and making me laugh in the middle of a task I had been dreading. He expressed it by learning things about me, not quizzing me or probing, just paying attention, and using what he learned to show me that he had been paying attention. He knew I drank my coffee with 1 sugar and no milk. He knew I got quiet when I was stressed, rather than loud. He knew that the thing I was most afraid of, underneath everything, was not being alone, but being invisible, being someone who could be set aside without the other person truly feeling the loss. "You're not invisible to me," he said one evening, when I'd said something honest about that fear. "I notice everything about you. I have from the beginning." "That could be unsettling," I said, deflecting because it was easier. "Or," he said, "it could be exactly what you deserve." I looked at my hands. "Let it be that," he said quietly. "You've spent enough time talking yourself out of what you deserve." That was the first time I cried in front of him, not because it was sad, because it was true. And true things have a particular way of breaking you open when your defenses are tired. He didn't make a thing of it. He just waited until I was done and handed me a napkin and said, "Still up for dessert?" And I laughed and said yes, and that was that. But then things got complicated again, because the world Alex lived in, the world he had kept carefully on the other side of our Tuesdays, had a way of spilling over, whether he intended it to or not. It started with a woman named Diana. I met her by accident. A Friday evening, 3 weeks after the Italian restaurant conversation, Alex had asked me to meet him at an address I didn't recognize. He said he wanted to show me something, and he said it with a lightness that felt genuine. So I went. The address turned out to be the lobby of a building so sleek and glass-fronted that I felt, the moment I walked through the doors, the full weight of the distance between his world and the bookstore and my secondhand kitchen table. He was already in the lobby, and standing next to him was a woman about my age, sharp-faced and perfectly assembled, in the way of someone who had learned to weaponize their appearance, who looked at me as I walked toward them with an expression that was smiling on the surface and assessing something underneath it. "Lily," Alex said, "this is Diana Voss. She's my VP of strategy." "How lovely," Diana said, extending a hand. Her grip was precise. "Alex has mentioned you." "Has he?" I said pleasantly. "He has." She held my hand just a fraction of a second too long before releasing it. "I've been curious to meet the woman who has him showing up to the office on Monday mornings looking, I don't know how to put it, lighter." It sounded like a compliment. It wasn't. Alex steered us away from the lobby quickly, and if he sensed the undercurrent of that exchange, he didn't name it, and I didn't name it either, because I was busy storing it carefully in the part of my brain that cataloged things I needed to think about later. Later came sooner than expected. 2 days after that lobby meeting, I was coming out of the bookstore at the end of my shift when I found Diana standing outside, leaning against the building like she had all the time in the world. "Miss Lily," she said, with a smile I didn't trust. "Diana." I stopped. "This is a coincidence." "It's not," she said pleasantly. "I wanted to speak to you privately. I hope you don't mind." I did mind, but I was curious, and curiosity has always been braver than caution in me. "What can I do for you?" I said. She tilted her head, as if considering how to frame what she had already decided to say. "I want you to understand something about Alex," she said. "Not to be unkind, just because I've known him for 8 years, and I think there are things you should be aware of before this goes any further." "What things?" "He's done this before," she said. "Not in a malicious way, but Alex goes through phases. He finds someone real, he calls it, someone uncomplicated by his world, and he invests in them, genuinely. And then his world pulls him back, the way it always does, and the person he chose gets left behind, and everyone around him watches it happen and doesn't say anything, because he's Alex, and no one tells Alex hard truths." She paused. She was watching my face with the focused attention of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. "I'm telling you," she said, "because I'd rather you hear it from someone honest than find out the way the others did." The others. She let the word land. She let me hear it. I looked at her for a long, steady moment, and I said, "Thank you for your concern." Then I walked to my car and sat in it for a very long time before I started the engine. The others. I drove home with that word sitting in the passenger seat beside me, and by the time I got to my apartment, I had made a decision. I was not going to let Diana's carefully placed grenade detonate without first finding out whether it was loaded. I was going to ask Alex, directly, clearly, without softening it or burying it or waiting for the right moment, because I had promised myself, and I intended to keep that promise, that I would not be managed by anyone ever again, including my own fear. I picked up my phone. I called him. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, everything okay?" "I need to ask you something," I said, "and I need you to answer me honestly, even if the answer is hard." A beat of silence. Then, "Always." "Diana came to see me today." The silence that followed was different from the first one. Not surprised, more like someone who had just seen a thing they had been half expecting finally arrive. "Tell me what she said," he said carefully. "She said you've done this before, found someone real, she called it, invested in them, and then your world pulled you back and they got left behind." I kept my voice even. "Is that true?" Another silence, longer, and then he said something I was not prepared for. "It's partially true," Alex said. Those 3 words landed in my chest like stones dropped into still water, quiet on impact, but the ripples kept going. "Partially," I repeated. "There was one person before you," he said. "Her name was Vanessa. We met about 2 years after Claire. She was a teacher. She was warm and genuine and completely outside my world, and I cared about her." He stopped. "But Diana is right that it ended because my world pulled me back. Not because I wanted it to end. Because I didn't fight hard enough to hold the 2 things together. Because I let the company become the reason for everything, including walking away from someone who deserved better." I was quiet. "But Lily, that was different. What that was me still not knowing what I actually wanted, still confusing the company for my identity, still letting other people's definitions of what my life should look like overrule what I actually felt." His voice was steady, but I could hear the effort underneath it. "That is not what this is." "How do I know that?" "You don't," he said. "Not yet. I can't give you certainty. I can only tell you that I am not the same man I was then, and that the reason I'm not is that I had to sit with what I did to Vanessa and understand it clearly enough that I would never do it again. And I can tell you that I have not, in 2 years since then, let myself get close to anyone. Because I wasn't ready. Because being ready mattered to me more than being comfortable. I pressed my free hand flat against the kitchen counter. The cool surface of it grounded me. "And Diana," I said, "why would she come to me with this? What does she want?" A pause, the kind that meant he was choosing how honest to be, and then choosing to be completely honest. "Diana has been in love with me for about 4 years, he said quietly. "I have never given her any reason to believe that was returned, and I have never acted on it in any way. But she is someone who has been waiting, I think, for me to eventually realize that the most logical person for my life is the most convenient one. And every time I show any indication of caring about someone else, she..." He stopped. "She protects what she thinks of as her position." My mouth went dry. "She didn't tell you she was going to do this?" "No, she didn't." "And you're telling me this because you asked me to be honest, even when it was hard," he said. "And because you deserve to know the full picture, all of it, not the edited version." I sat down on my kitchen floor, just folded down and sat there, back against the cabinets, phone pressed to my ear, staring at the ceiling and trying to hold all of this in my hands at once. Diana, Vanessa, Claire, the company, the careful shape of all the things that existed in Alex's world before I walked into it, all of them now pressing up against the small, rebuilt life I had been tending like something fragile and newly growing. "Lily?" "I'm here," I said. "I'm just thinking." "Take all the time you need." "Stop saying that," I said, and it came out sharper than I intended. "What?" "Take all the time you need. You keep saying it, like you're so patient, like you have infinite time and nothing costs you anything." My voice was rising now, not in rage, but in something more honest, the particular rawness of a person who has been strong for a very long time and has just run out of room for it. "It costs you something too, Alex, this waiting, this not knowing. Does it?" A long, long silence. "Yes," he said, and his voice was different now, the composed, careful layer of it gone. "It costs me a great deal. Every day I don't know where we are. Every day I wonder if I'm doing enough, saying enough, being enough. Yes, it costs me." I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth. "Good," I said finally. "Good?" "Good, because I need to know you have something at stake here too. I can't be the only one who's scared." "Lily." His voice broke slightly on my name, just slightly. "I am terrified. Every single Tuesday I walk into that diner and I think, this could be the day she decides this is too complicated. This could be the day she looks at everything my life is and decides she doesn't want it." He exhaled. "I have been walking toward you for months and hoping to God you were walking toward me too." I closed my eyes. "I am," I said quietly. "I am walking toward you. I need us to be honest about all of it, not just the good parts." "All of it," he agreed. "Whatever you need to know, whenever you need to know it. No more waiting for the right moment." "Okay." "Okay," he said. We stayed on the phone for another hour that night, not talking about anything important, or rather, talking about everything, which is the same thing. His father's newest book obsession, my mother's latest mystery series, the customer who had come into the bookstore that week insisting that she needed a book exactly like the last one she loved, but also completely different. I fell asleep on the kitchen floor at some point, phone still in my hand, and woke up to a text from him that just said, "Get off the floor, you'll regret it in the morning." I laughed out loud, alone in my apartment at 1 a.m, and moved to the couch. I did not address the Diana situation with her directly. I considered it, turned it over, held it up to the light of what I knew about myself. And what I knew about myself was this: I was not going to waste energy fighting for ground I already stood on. She had tried to shake me, and I had not been shaken. That was enough. What I did do was tell Alex, plainly and without softening it, that I needed Diana to understand her approach had not achieved what she intended. He handled it. I don't know exactly what he said to her. He told me it was a direct conversation and that she had not enjoyed it, and that she had been professional about it afterward, and that it would not happen again. I believed him, partly because his word had not failed me yet, partly because Diana struck me as too strategic to burn a bridge she still had to work across. Life continued. My life, my small, rebuilding life, continued alongside the larger and more complicated life of a man who had more power and responsibility in a single Tuesday morning than most people navigate in a year. And what I discovered, carefully and with appropriate caution, was that those two lives could coexist, that his world didn't have to swallow mine, that I didn't have to become smaller to fit beside him. He was deliberate about that. He made space for me to remain entirely myself. My bookstore, my routines, my evening classes, the women I had slowly started befriending at the community center, where I had signed up for a writing workshop on a Thursday night whim. He never asked me to adjust my schedule for his. He adjusted his. He showed up in my world far more often than he pulled me into his. And when he did bring me into his, a company event here, a dinner with a colleague there, he kept his hand near mine and his attention on me in a way that told everyone in the room exactly where his priorities were. That was when I started to fall. Not in the soft focus, gradual way of movies, in the real way, messy and inconvenient and arriving suddenly in the middle of completely ordinary moments. The way he pushed his eggs around his plate when he was thinking hard about something. The way he called his father every Sunday without fail and argued affectionately about naval history for 45 minutes. The way he looked at me when I was talking about something I loved, books or writing, or the particular satisfaction of recommending exactly the right thing to exactly the right person, like I was interesting, like I was genuinely interesting, and he was glad to be in the room with me. Ben had stopped looking at me that way sometime in year 3. I had barely noticed it happening. I noticed now. I was approximately 4 months into this new reality, this careful, growing, terrifying thing, when the second disruption arrived. And this one came not from Diana or from Alex's world, but from mine. Ben called me. I almost didn't answer. I stared at his name on my screen for 4 full rings and had every intention of sending it to voicemail, because nothing Ben had to say to me was my responsibility anymore. But something, the same stupid curiosity that had kept me standing in that lobby listening to Diana, made me pick up. "What do you want, Ben?" A pause, long enough that I wondered if he'd expected voicemail. "I heard you've been seeing someone," he said. My jaw tightened. "That's not your business." I know it's not." He sounded strange, not his usual composed, slightly dismissive self, something underneath it. I heard who it was. And I wanted to call you." Another pause. "How are you?" "Ben," I kept my voice flat, "why are you really calling?" Silence. Then, on a long exhale, "Emma and I broke up." I waited. 3 weeks ago. It turns out that the qualities that made her interesting when she was someone else's wife made her very difficult to live with full time. He laughed, but it was hollow. I know exactly what you're thinking." "Do you?" "You're thinking I deserve it." "I'm thinking," I said carefully, "that I don't feel anything about it either way, which is an interesting discovery." "Lily, I hope you're okay," I said, and I meant it, in the distant, clean way you mean things for people who have moved entirely to the periphery of your emotional landscape. "I genuinely hope you're okay, but I'm not the person you should be calling." "You look happy," he said suddenly. "I saw you last week. You were walking with someone. You were laughing. You looked completely different." I thought of that afternoon, Alex and I walking back from the Thai place, arguing about whether the movie adaptation of a book I loved was worth watching, both of us gesticulating in the way of people who care too much about small things and enjoy caring too much about small things together. "I am happy," I said simply. "I made a mistake," Ben said. 3 words. The words I had waited for through 11 years, and then through the agonizing weeks after the divorce, the words I had ached for in that tiny apartment when the silence was loudest, the words that would have broken me open and undone everything if they had come 3 months ago. They landed now like rocks thrown at a window I no longer lived behind. "I know you believe that," I said, "but it doesn't change anything for me. Lily, take care of yourself, Ben." And I hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand and waited for the complicated feelings to arrive, the grief, the anger, the old pull of wanting to matter to him, wanting to have mattered enough that losing me would hurt. But what arrived instead was something I hadn't expected, something quiet and clear and almost startling in its simplicity. Relief. Relief that his words reached me and found nothing vulnerable left to wound. Related that the part of me that had spent years trying to be enough for someone who had already decided I wasn't, that part was healed. Not perfectly, not without scar tissue, but healed enough that his voice on the phone was just a voice on a phone, and the past was just the past. I texted Alex. Ben called. He called back in 30 seconds. "Are you okay?" "Yes," I said. And then, because I had promised us both honesty, he said Emma left him. He said he made a mistake. A beat. "What did you say?" I said it didn't change anything. Does it change anything? I thought about the question seriously, because it deserved serious consideration. I thought about Ben at 29, the man I had married, who had been charming and certain and full of plans, who had made me feel chosen in a way that had meant everything to me then. I thought about what we had built and what it had cost and what he had done with it. And then I thought about Tuesday lunches and honest conversations, and a man who had sat on a bookstore floor sorting through returns and made me laugh in the middle of inventory. "No," I said, "it doesn't change anything." I heard Alex exhale. "Okay." "Were you worried?" "A little," he admitted. "Don't be," I said. "I know the difference now between someone who loved me when it was easy and someone who—" I stopped. "Someone who chooses me on purpose." The silence that followed was different from all the other silences, warmer, weighted in the way of something that is about to become something else. "Lily," he said. "Yes?" "I want to take you somewhere this weekend. Not a diner, not a restaurant. Somewhere I want to show you." He paused. "My father wants to meet you. He has been asking for weeks. He says any woman who can get me to buy him 4 books in one visit is either a genius or a saint, and either way, he wants to shake her hand." I laughed. "The genuine, unguarded kind. Are you asking me to meet your father?" "I am." "That's a significant thing." "I know. I mean it to be." I was quiet for a moment. In my chest, something that had been slowly, painstakingly knitting itself back together gave one last pull and closed. "Okay," I said. "Yes, I want to meet him." "He's going to interrogate you about naval history," Alex warned. "Good thing I know where all the books are." He laughed, low and warm and real, and I held the sound of it after we hung up, the way you hold something that matters to you, careful and present and grateful for the weight of it in your hands. I was not the woman who had dropped yellow tulips on a bedroom floor anymore. I was not the woman who had signed papers at a kitchen table alone or moved into a faded apartment with nothing but a secondhand mattress and a napkin with her mother's words on it. I was not even the woman who had walked into a diner 6 months ago and ordered a club sandwich and been surprised by a man who listened like it meant something. I was someone new. Someone built from all of those women, but not contained by any of them. And this weekend, I was going to walk into the next part of my life with my eyes wide open. But what I did not know, what none of us knew, not yet, was that the weekend ahead was going to bring something none of us had seen coming. Not Alex, not his father, not me. Something that would test everything we had built in the most public, most painful, most unexpectedly complicated way imaginable. And when it arrived, I would have to decide once and for all, not whether I trusted Alex, but whether I trusted myself. His father's name was Richard, and he shook my hand for exactly 4 seconds before saying, "You're the one who got my son to buy books. Sit down. I have questions." Alex caught my eye over his father's shoulder and mouthed, "I warned you." I bit back a smile and sat down. Richard Hartwell was 75 years old and built like someone who had spent 30 years on the ocean and had never entirely come back to land. He was direct in the way of people who had given orders for a living and had long since stopped seeing the point of softening what they meant. He had Alex's eyes, the same quality of focused attention, the same stillness when he was listening. But where Alex expressed things quietly, Richard expressed them fully, immediately, without apology. Within 10 minutes, he had asked me what I thought about the leadership failures at the Battle of Leyte Gulf, what I was reading currently, and whether I thought Alex worked too much. I answered all 3 honestly. He sat back after the 3rd answer and said to Alex, without looking away from me, "I like her." "I know," Alex said. "She didn't hedge on the Leyte Gulf question. Everyone hedges." "I noticed that too," Alex said, and the warmth in his voice when he said it went straight to the center of my chest. We had lunch, real, unhurried Sunday lunch, the kind I had not sat through in longer than I could remember. Food on the table, and someone's father making arguments about history, and the conversation going in 6 directions at once, and nobody watching the clock. Richard told stories about his Navy years with the particular relish of a man who had earned them, and I listened and laughed and pushed back when I disagreed, and every time I did, Richard's eyes got a little brighter, like disagreement was the highest compliment. Halfway through the afternoon, while Alex was in the kitchen, Richard looked at me across the table and said, without preamble, "He's different with you." "Different how?" "Lighter." He said it the same way Diana had, but where Diana had made it sound like a warning, Richard made it sound like an answer to a prayer. After Claire, he closed down. Not visibly, he's good at functioning, but I know my son. Something went out in him, and it's been back in him for about 4 months now. He looked at me steadily. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." "I'm just talking to him," I said. "No," Richard shook his head. "You're seeing him. That's rarer than you think." Alex came back from the kitchen with coffee, looked between us and said, "Should I be concerned about whatever just happened?" "Your father was just being kind," I said. "He's never just kind," Alex said. "He's kind for a reason." "Then the reason is that I approve," Richard said, picking up his coffee cup, "and I am not a man who approves of many things, so I suggest you take note." Driving home that evening, with the sky going orange and the city coming up around us, I felt something I hadn't felt in so long that I almost didn't recognize it. Safety. Not the absence of risk. I was not naive enough to believe we were past risk, but the specific safety of knowing that what you had was real, that the people in it were good, that you had not made a catastrophic mistake by trusting again. I reached over and put my hand on Alex's. He turned his palm up immediately, without looking away from the road, and held it. We didn't say anything for a long time. "Well," he said finally. "Your father called me the one who got you to buy books," I said. "I think that's the best thing anyone's ever called me." "He also told me, while you were in the bathroom, that if I let you get away, he would be personally disappointed in me." He's very direct. He's been direct since 1973, and he's not stopping now. Alex glanced over at me. "What about you? What did you think of him?" "I think," I said, "that I understand you better now, where the listening comes from, the patience." "He taught me that listening was a form of respect," Alex said. "He used to say, in the Navy, that the officers who talked too much were always the ones who made the mistakes. The ones who listened, they were the ones you wanted beside you when everything went sideways." "Smart man. Don't tell him that. He's insufferable enough." I laughed. and the evening was perfect, the way evenings sometimes are when you're paying attention to them, complete and clear, and something you know even as it's happening that you will remember. That was Saturday. Sunday morning, my phone blew up. I was at my kitchen table with coffee and a book when the notifications started coming in, one after another in rapid succession, the kind of cluster that means something is circulating. I picked up my phone and my stomach dropped. It was a photo. Or rather, it was a series of them, published in one of those glossy entertainment and society news websites that covered the movements of wealthy people with the breathless dedication of a nature documentary. The headline read, "Hartwell spotted with mystery woman. Who is she?" The photos were from 2 nights ago, from the Italian restaurant. Someone had taken them through the window, candid, unposed, but clear enough. Alex leaning forward across the table, me with my chin in my hand, laughing at something, his hand near mine. The body language of 2 people who had forgotten there was a world outside of their conversation. I stared at the photos for a long time. I looked happy in them. That was the thing that hit me first and hardest. Not the exposure, not the headlines, not the comments section I absolutely did not scroll through. I looked like a person who had come back to life. My phone rang. Alex. "I saw," I said before he could speak. "Lily, I'm sorry. I don't know who took them. I have people looking into it. I should have been more careful about the restaurants we—" "Alex," I cut him off gently, "I'm not upset about the photos." A beat. "You're not?" "I look happy in them," I said. "I look like myself. I've been invisible for so long that part of me is almost relieved there's evidence I exist." A long pause. "You realize you just said the most beautiful and heartbreaking thing at the same time." "I know. I have a talent for that." I looked at the photos again. "What does this mean practically? What happens now?" "Practically," he said, and I could hear him shifting into the part of his mind that managed complexity for a living, "it means the story will run for a day or 2. People will be curious. My PR team will say nothing, which is the right move. And then something else will happen in the world, and it will stop being interesting." He paused. "Unless you want to address it. We can do that too, on your terms, however you want." "No," I said. "I don't want to address it. I don't owe the internet an explanation." "No," he agreed. "You don't." "But I want to be prepared," I said, "if this keeps happening. If being around you means being looked at, I want to be ready for that. Not hiding from it, but standing in it, as myself." "Does that make sense?" "Complete sense," he said. "And I want to help you with that however I can. But Lily, you have always been the steadiest person in any room you've walked into. You stood in front of Ben with divorce papers in your hands, and you didn't fall. You walked away from Sarah. You started over from nothing. You don't need to be prepared for scrutiny. You're already made of the right material." I swallowed hard. "You can't say things like that and then expect me to be normal about it." "I'm just being accurate," he said. "Alex." "I know," he said softer. "I know." What I had not told him, what I was not yet ready to say out loud, was that I loved him. The feeling had been building for weeks, arriving quietly in the margins of ordinary moments, and it was enormous now, too large to keep pretending I hadn't noticed it. But I was still careful, still the woman who had learned the hard way that saying the thing too soon could be a form of recklessness. I wanted to say it when I was completely certain, when it felt true, all the way down. Monday passed in the particular charged quiet of a story circulating without your participation. 3 customers at the bookstore recognized me. I could tell by the way they looked, the second glance, the whispered conversation behind the travel section. Derek, my manager, pulled me aside mid-afternoon and said, with the focused intensity of a 26-year-old who had clearly spent the weekend reading gossip websites, "So, Alexander Hartwell." "None of your business, Derek," I said pleasantly. "Absolutely fair," he said, and backed away. Tuesday came, our usual time, our usual diner. But when I walked in that morning, there were 2 men in the back corner who had the particular stillness of people being professionally unobtrusive, and I understood immediately that they were Alex's security detail, something I had not fully reckoned with before. because he had always moved through our Tuesdays without them. He stood when I came to the table. He always stood. I had noticed that early on and had been moved by it in a way I was almost embarrassed by, because it was such a simple thing, standing when someone you cared about walked into the room, and yet it was a thing I had gone years without. "Security," I said, sitting down, nodding subtly toward the corner. "After the photos, yes." He sat back down. "I'm sorry, I know it changes the feeling." "I'll get used to it," I said, and then, "Does it bother you, living like that? Always being watched, always being protected, but also contained?" He considered this seriously. "Early on it did. Now it's just texture, like traffic. You stop noticing it." He looked at me. "Does it bother you? Be honest." "Ask me in 3 months," I said. He nodded like that was a completely fair answer. We had barely ordered when my phone vibrated on the table. I almost ignored it. I didn't take calls during our Tuesdays. It was an unspoken rule we had both fallen into. But I glanced at the screen out of reflex. The number was Sarah's. I turned the phone face down. "You don't have to do that on my account," Alex said. "I know. I want to." But my mind snagged on it throughout breakfast, the way an unresolved thing will nag at the edge of your attention no matter how firmly you set it aside. By the time we were on coffee refills, I had made a decision. "Sarah called," I said. Alex looked up. "She's seen the photos," I said. "She wants back in. I can feel it without even answering." "What do you want to do?" "I don't know yet." I turned my cup in my hands. Part of me wants to answer. 14 years is a long time, and part of me... I stopped. Part of me knows that the version of Sarah who dropped me when Ben told his story, and the version of Sarah calling now because she's curious about Alexander Hartwell, are not two different people. She's the same person. She just has a different reason. You're allowed to be angry about that. I'm past angry, I said. I think that's the problem. I'm just tired of it. Tired of people who show up when your life gets shiny and disappear when it gets hard. "Then you already know your answer," he said. I looked at him. "When did you get so certain about everything?" "I'm not certain about everything," he said. "I'm certain about you." He said it directly, without drama, in the same tone he might use to state any established fact. "I have been certain about you since you put a book in my hands in that back aisle and talked about it like it was the most important thing in the world. Watching you rebuild your life has been one of the most remarkable things I've ever had the privilege of being close to. You don't owe Sarah anything. You don't owe any of them anything." I did not cry. I wanted to, but I kept it together because I was in public and because I had something more important to say. "I love you," I said. It came out before I had finished deciding to say it, clean and clear and immediately irreversible. Alex went completely still. "I know I started. "Lily." He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "I have been in love with you since approximately our 3rd Tuesday," he said. "I have been waiting for you to be ready to hear that." "3rd Tuesday?" I stared at him. "That was months ago." 11 weeks ago, he said. "But who's counting?" "You are," I said. "Apparently you are." "Apparently," he said. And he smiled the way he had that very first day, quiet and warm and genuine, the smile of a man who was exactly where he wanted to be and knew it. I laughed. And underneath the laugh was something vast and steady and terrifying and wonderful. The feeling of a door opening, not into the unknown, but into something you recognized, something that felt, against all the odds and all the evidence of everything that had come before, like home. We walked out of the diner that Tuesday holding hands, through the glass front of the building, through the street where people moved around us indifferently, past the 2 security men who fell into step a discreet distance behind. Simple and ordinary, and for me, after everything, revolutionary. I did not call Sarah back. I got home that evening to a voicemail from her. She had seen the photos. She was so happy for me, she said. She had thought about me so often. She felt terrible about how things had ended between us. She wanted to reconnect, to start over, to be the friend she should have been when I needed her. Her voice was warm, familiar. 14 years of shared history living in every inflection. I listened to the whole message. And then I sat with it. I sat with it the way I had learned to sit with hard things, not running from it or toward it, just being present with what it actually was, underneath what I wanted it to be. What it was this. Sarah had not found me when I was eating cereal alone at a kitchen counter in a faded apartment. She had not called when I was working extra shifts to cover a $60 rent increase. She had not shown up at the bookstore on an inventory Thursday because she had seen in my face that I was tired. She had not called for 11 weeks of Tuesdays. She was calling now, 3 days after a photo of me at an Italian restaurant with Alex Hartwell had circulated on the internet. I deleted the voicemail. And I was okay. I was more than okay. I was clear. The weeks that followed had a particular quality of momentum, like a current that had been moving slowly and had finally found open water. Alex and I stopped pretending we were just friends who had lunch on Tuesdays. We were in each other's lives, fully and deliberately, weekends, evenings, the ordinary in-between hours that are the actual substance of two people building something together. I started meeting his world, colleagues, friends, a few people who were genuinely warm and curious and interested in me as a person. I brought my world to him, too. My evening writing class, my mother on video call, who told Alex within 30 seconds that she had heard a great deal about him and expected he would continue to deserve it. My gradual accumulation of new friends who knew me only as Lily and not as anyone's wife. I started writing. At first just in the workshop, small personal essays that my instructor praised for their specificity and emotional directness. Then longer pieces, braver pieces, things that told the truth about the past year in ways I hadn't been ready to face when I was still living inside them. My instructor submitted one of my pieces to an online literary magazine without telling me, and it was published on a Thursday afternoon. And when Alex saw the notification, he called me immediately and said, "I just read your piece, Lily. You have to keep doing this." "It's just a small magazine," I said. "That is not the point," he said firmly. "The point is that you wrote something true and brave, and it's out in the world now. That matters. You matter." I was beginning to believe that, actually believe it, down in the places where belief has to live to do any good. 3 months after that Tuesday at the diner when I said I love you, Alex asked me to move in with him. We were at his apartment, my first time there because we had spent most of our time in my world, on my terms, until I was ready. It was a large apartment, clean-lined and full of books, warmer than I had expected given its size. He had clearly made it a home rather than a showpiece, and the evidence of his actual life was everywhere. The stack of his father's recommended reading on the side table, the single running shoe in the hallway because the other was apparently always somewhere else, the small framed photograph on the kitchen windowsill that I had picked up and examined and discovered was a picture of him at about 12, on a Navy ship with his father, both of them squinting into the sun. We were standing in the kitchen after dinner, doing dishes the way we always did them, him washing, me drying, arguing amiably about nothing important, when he turned off the tap and turned to me and said, "I want you to live here." I went still. "Not because of the photos or the public stuff or any of that," he said quickly, "because I want to have dinner with you every night. Because I want to do dishes with you at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday. Because I want to know that when I come home, you'll be there." I held the dish I had been drying and I looked at this man, this steady, honest, careful, present man who had walked into my bookstore and broken the seal on a life I thought was over. And I thought about everything it had taken to get here. The bedroom floor and the crushed flowers, the faded apartment and the napkin on the mirror, the temp job and the extra shifts and the evening writing class taken on a whim. Every single choice I had made alone, for myself, because I was learning to trust myself before I could trust anyone else. All of that had led here. "Yes," I said. He looked at me like he wasn't sure he'd heard correctly. "Yes," I said again, clearly, completely. "I want to live here." He exhaled, long and slow and full of something that had been held for a long time. He crossed the kitchen in 2 steps and held me. Really held me. The way you hold something you were afraid of losing and have just been told you don't have to lose after all. I pressed my face against his shoulder and closed my eyes. "I have something to tell you," he said into my hair. I pulled back and looked at him. "Right now?" "It's important." My heart picked up. "Okay." He took a breath. His expression had shifted again. That same careful quality I had first seen in the diner the morning he told me about Hartwell Technologies. The look of a man about to say the true thing. "I asked your mother's permission," he said. "Last week. I called her." I stared. "You called my mother?" "She's your most important person," he said simply. "I wanted her to know who I was before she found out about any of this from a gossip website." I couldn't speak. My throat had closed completely. "She said—" He stopped. He almost smiled. "She said that she already knew because you had told her about me more than you probably realized, and that any man who made her daughter laugh the way I apparently made you laugh was worth talking to." His voice was quieter now. And then she told me about the napkin. "What?" I breathed. "The napkin on the mirror. The thing your father used to say, about learning to be a whole person." He held my gaze. "She said she knew you were ready when you stopped needing the napkin to remind you." I had taken it down 3 weeks ago. I hadn't told anyone. He reached into his jacket pocket and put something on the kitchen counter between us. A small box, dark blue, simple. My heart stopped. "I am not asking you to change your name or your career or anything about the life you built," he said. "I am asking you to let me build the next part alongside you, as your partner, as the man who has loved you since the 3rd Tuesday and is done pretending 3 Tuesdays a week is enough." He opened the box. "Lily, will you marry me?" The ring was not ostentatious. It was simple and beautiful. A single stone, clean cut, exactly the kind of thing I would have chosen for myself, which meant he had been paying exactly the kind of attention I had always deserved and never had. My eyes filled. I didn't fight it. "You talked to my mother," I said. "I did. And she approved. Enthusiastically. She also gave me the recipe for your favorite birthday cake because she said I should start learning it immediately." I laughed. It came out wet and unsteady and completely genuine. "Yes," I said, for the 3rd time, the most important time. "Yes, absolutely yes." He slid the ring onto my finger and I looked down at it, this small, clean, real thing on my hand, and I thought about every version of myself that had existed in the past 1.5 years. The woman on the bedroom floor, the woman signing papers alone, the woman eating cereal at a counter with one light on and nothing ahead of her but the daily work of deciding to keep going. I wanted to tell all of them, it's going to be okay, more than okay. It's going to be real. He kissed me, gently, like something chosen and certain and permanent. And outside the apartment, the city went about its business, indifferent, enormous, full of lives colliding and breaking and rebuilding in all directions, while inside, a kitchen with a photograph of a boy on a Navy ship and a stack of books about naval history, and one slightly mismatched running shoe in the hallway, 2 people who had both been broken and had both done the hard work of becoming whole, stood together and held each other, and knew, without reservation, that this was right. This was real. This was the beginning of something that belonged to both of us equally. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I was not afraid of the beginning. My mother cried when I called her. Not the delicate dabbing kind, the full, shaking, 20-year exhale of a woman who had watched her daughter survive something terrible and had been quietly holding her breath ever since, waiting for the proof that survival wasn't the end of the story. He called me, she said between breaths, last Tuesday. He talked to me for 45 minutes, Lily. 45 minutes. He asked me about your father. He asked what made you happy when you were small. She stopped. He wanted to know you, the whole you, not just the woman you are now, the woman you came from. I pressed my hand over my mouth. That's the kind of man you marry, she said. Not the kind who makes you feel lucky to be chosen. The kind who knows he's lucky to have found you. I thought about Ben, about the 11 years of making myself smaller, quieter, more accommodating, more useful, all in the service of being chosen enough, loved enough, kept. I thought about how I had confused being needed with being valued, how I had spent a decade trying to earn something that was either freely given or it was nothing at all. Mom, I said, I'm happy. I know, sweetheart, she said. I know. I can hear it. And she was right. Even she could hear it. The particular quality of a happiness that was not performed or precarious or dependent on someone else's mood. Something rooted, something mine. We set a date 3 months out, not because we were rushing, but because neither of us saw the point of waiting once we knew. Alex had said simply that he had spent enough of his life being strategic about timing, and he was done being strategic about the things that mattered most. I had agreed. We had both waited long enough for the right thing. The right thing was here. We were going to hold on to it. The wedding planning itself was deliberately quiet. No event coordinator pulling us in opposite directions. No guest list running into the hundreds. No pressure to make it a spectacle worthy of the name Hartwell. Alex had been clear about that from the beginning, and so had I. We wanted a ceremony that was actually about us, not a performance for other people's consumption. But the world had opinions. The story had not died down the way Alex predicted it would. It had grown. Slowly, steadily, fed by the occasional photograph and by the particular appetite people have for a story they can package neatly. The billionaire CEO and the bookstore woman, the powerful man and the ordinary person, the fairy tale with a before and after. I was not naive enough to be surprised by it, but I was not prepared for the specific way it would find the people from my before. Sarah sent a card, a physical card, handwritten, slipped through the mail slot at the bookstore addressed to me personally. It was 2 pages, close written, earnest in a way I had to respect even as I recognized it for what it was. She said she was sorry. She said she had made the wrong choice when Ben called. She said she had thought about it for months and had no excuse and wasn't offering one. She said she hoped I would give her the chance to be the friend she should have been. I read it twice. I sat with it for 3 days. I thought about 14 years and matching Halloween costumes in college, and the way she had held my hand through my father's illness, and the day she stood beside me at my wedding and cried the real kind of tears. I thought about how people were not single decisions, how they were accumulations, patterns, the overall shape of who they chose to be over time. And I thought, what did I actually want from this? I called Alex. I read him the card over the phone. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then, what does your gut say? My gut says she means it, I said. My gut also says that meaning it now doesn't undo what she did then. Those 2 things can both be true, he said. I know, but what do I do with them both being true? That's not a question I can answer for you, he said. What I can tell you is that forgiveness and trust are different things. You can give her one without giving her the other. I turned that over for a long time. Forgiveness and trust are different things. One was something I could choose to offer freely because carrying the weight of resentment was heavier than the act of letting go. The other was something she would have to earn back, slowly, in the small daily choices that actually revealed character. I wrote her back, a shorter letter. I told her I had heard her. I told her I was not ready to pick up where we left off and that I might never be, and that she needed to understand that possibility before she invested hope in the alternative. But I told her that I was willing to see where things went, slowly, on my terms, at my pace. Not because I owed it to her, because I chose it. I felt clean after I sent it, like I had resolved something in myself, not for her benefit, but for mine. The week before the wedding, Ben tried one more time. Not a call this time, an email. Formal and strangely careful, written in the distant register of someone who has run the draft through several revisions, trying to land on the right tone and hasn't quite succeeded. He wished me well. He said he meant that sincerely. He said he hoped she, meaning me, would be treated the way she deserved. I read it once. I did not respond. There was nothing left to say. There was no version of a response that served me or honored what I had built. He had made his choices, and I had made mine, and those two paths had led to entirely different places. And the distance between them was not something an email could bridge, and was not something I wanted bridged. I closed the email. I went back to the chapter I had been writing, my first attempt at something longer than an essay, a personal narrative that my writing instructor had called the most honest thing she had read in years. And I kept working. That was all. He was behind me. I kept going forward. The morning of the wedding, my mother called at 7. I was already awake, had been awake since 5. Not from nerves exactly, but from the particular alertness of a day you know is significant, the kind that doesn't let you sleep past it. "How do you feel?" she asked. I thought about it, honestly. "Clear," I said. "I feel clear." "That's the right answer," she said. "On my wedding day, I felt terrified. Your father said to me, he said, if you're not scared, it isn't real. But if you're clear underneath the scared, that means you know what you're doing." She paused. "Are you clear underneath?" "All the way down," I said. She exhaled. "Then go marry him." The ceremony was small. 30 people, all of whom had been chosen with the particular intentionality of two people who had both learned the hard way that size was not the same as meaning. Richard was there, in his navy dress uniform, which he had informed Alex he was wearing regardless of whether it was appropriate, because he had earned it and he was 75 and no one was going to tell him otherwise. My mother flew in the day before, smaller than I remembered and sharp-eyed as ever, and when she saw Alex for the first time in person, she took both his hands in hers and looked at him for a long moment and said, "Take care of my girl." And Alex said, without hesitation, "That's what I plan to spend the rest of my life doing." She nodded once, satisfied, like a decision had been confirmed. I wore a dress that I had found myself, in a small shop, on an ordinary afternoon when I hadn't been looking for it. Not white, a deep, warm ivory, simple and clean-lined, the kind of dress that didn't need anything to be added to it. I did my own hair. I carried flowers I had chosen that morning because they were beautiful, not because they matched a color scheme. I walked toward Alex alone. There was no one to give me away because I was not anyone's to give. I came to him freely, under my own power, because I chose to. And when I reached him and he looked at me, that full, unguarded look, the one that said, "There you are," the same way it had said it since that very first Tuesday, I felt the last small piece of held breath inside me, finally, completely, release. "Hi," he said quietly, just for me. "Hi," I said back. Richard cried during the vows. He later denied this with the firmness of a retired naval officer, and we let him deny it out of respect. But I saw it, and Alex saw it, and we exchanged a look that contained an entire conversation. When it was done, when Alex kissed me and Richard started a round of applause that the whole room joined and my mother laughed out loud from the front row, I stood in the middle of all of it and felt something I want to try to describe accurately, because it was not what I expected. It was not triumph. It was not the particular satisfaction of a story that had resolved the way it was supposed to, the wronged woman vindicated, the difficult chapters redeemed by the happy ending. Life is not a story, and I had learned in the past 2 years to be suspicious of narratives that ended with someone else as the proof of your worth. What I felt was simpler and more complete than triumph. I felt like myself, fully, finally, without reservation, like myself. Lily, who had loved books since childhood, who had written her way through the worst year of her life, who had learned to eat alone without it meaning anything terrible, who had rebuilt her own spine from scratch and found it stronger than the original. Lily, who was standing here not because she had been rescued or chosen or elevated by anyone else's power or wealth or name, but because she had done the long, unglamorous, deeply private work of becoming a whole person. And whole people attract whole people. And here she was. Here I was. The months that followed the wedding had a texture I want to remember accurately, because they were not uniformly easy, and I think it matters to say that. Building a life with another person, a real life, not a performance of one, requires constant small negotiations, adjustments, the willingness to be known in the least flattering moments, and stay anyway. There were weeks when Alex's world pressed against ours with a weight I had to consciously decide not to let crush me. Decisions that required his attention at 11 at night, travel that took him away for 4 or 5 days at a stretch, the particular loneliness of a large apartment when its other occupant was 3 time zones away. I handled it, not by shrinking or by silence, but by naming it, directly, clearly, the way we had agreed from the beginning. I need more from you this week. I'm struggling with this part. Can we find a solution together? And Alex handled it. He adjusted, restructured, delegated with a focus he hadn't applied to his personal life before, because no one had required it of him, because no one before had stood in front of him and said clearly, I am worth adjusting for. He said once, after a particularly honest conversation about a stretch of weeks where I had felt peripheral to his schedule, "You know what you do that no one else in my life has ever done?" I asked what. "You tell me the true thing," he said. "You don't manage my feelings or work around them or decide I'm too busy to hear something difficult. You just say it, directly, and then you give me the chance to fix it." He looked at me steadily. "Do you know how rare that is?" "You should have demanded it earlier," I said. "You should have too," he said. We looked at each other, both guilty, both knowing it, both choosing differently now. My writing career, if you could call it that in those early months, grew in the unplanned, organic way of things that are actually good, not forced or manufactured, just real enough to find their own momentum. The literary magazine piece led to another and another after that. My writing instructor submitted my longer work to a publisher without telling me, a habit of hers I was beginning to recognize, and the response was cautiously interested and then less cautiously interested. And one morning I was standing in the kitchen making coffee when Alex came in holding his phone and said, "Your editor just emailed me. I think she emailed me by mistake. But Lily, they want to offer you a book deal." I put down the coffee. "What?" I said. He turned the phone toward me. I read the email. I read it again. "That's," I started. "Yes," he said, "that's a real offer." "It is absolutely a real offer," he said. And he was grinning now, the unrestrained kind, the kind I had rarely seen on his face because he was usually so composed. And it was magnificent. I sat down on the kitchen floor. For the second time in my life, in a moment that was too large to remain standing in, I sat down on the kitchen floor. Alex sat down next to me, right there on the tile, in his work clothes, without any hesitation. "You did this," he said. "I wrote it at 2 a.m. on a second-hand laptop," I said. "You wrote the truth," he said. "That's not the same as just writing." I leaned my head against his shoulder. He put his arm around me. We sat there on the kitchen floor of the apartment that had become our home, in the morning light, with the coffee going cold on the counter. And I thought about a napkin on a bathroom mirror in a faded apartment that smelled of old wood. I thought about my mother's voice saying, "A whole person, not half a person looking for the other half." I thought about yellow tulips on a bedroom floor and the long, terrible, necessary journey from that moment to this one. I had not been rescued. I want to be clear about that, because the story could be told that way and it would be wrong. Alex had not found me and fixed me. He had found me in the process of fixing myself and had loved what he found. not despite the brokenness, not charmed by the damage, but genuinely, solidly in love with the person who had the courage to not stay broken. That distinction matters more to me than I have words for. I called Richard that afternoon to tell him about the book deal. He said, with the particular satisfaction of a man who had been right about something and was not above being pleased about it, "I told Alex the first day I met you. I said, that woman knows things, real things, not school things, earned things." He paused. "Put me in the acknowledgments." "I already planned to," I said. He harumphed, which was his version of being moved. I called my mother next. She cried again, the same shaking 20-year exhale. I let her. I cried too, this time without embarrassment or restraint. "Dad would have been so proud," she said. "I know," I said. "I know he would have. He would have taken the book to the grocery store and told complete strangers about it." "I know that too," I said, and I laughed through the tears, the messy, grateful, uncontrollable kind, because that was exactly what he would have done. That evening, Alex and I sat at the kitchen table, the real kitchen table now, not the secondhand one I had pushed against the wall of my small apartment, and had dinner the way we always did, simply, without occasion, talking about the ordinary things that were the actual substance of the life we had built. His father's newest reading obsession, the customer who had come into the bookstore that week, because yes, I still worked there, 2 days a week, because I loved it and because I refused to let go of the things that had held me together when nothing else did. The chapter I was revising, the Sunday dinner we were hosting next weekend, ordinary things, chosen things, mine. I had spent a long time believing that the worst thing that ever happened to me was walking into that bedroom and finding everything I thought I had scattered across the floor. I do not believe that anymore. I believe now that it was the first necessary step toward everything that actually mattered. Not because pain is beautiful or because suffering is secretly a gift. I refuse that version of the story. But because I had been living a half-life without knowing it, and the breaking of that half-life was the only thing loud enough to wake me up. I woke up. I got off the floor. I built something real. And the woman who did all of that, the woman who put that napkin on the mirror and went to work and started over in the dark and learned, slowly and with tremendous difficulty, to trust herself, that woman is who I am. She is who I will always be. No one gave her to me. I built her myself, out of the wreckage, with my own hands. Everything else, Alex, the book, the life that looks from the outside like a fairy tale, everything else grew from that. A whole person, not half a person looking for the other half. A whole person who chose, with her eyes open and her heart clear and her spine intact, to love and be loved in return. And that is the only story worth telling.